Hello, everyone. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Questions, questions, questions. Bring them on.
Hi, everyone. So, for today's call, in the book, you write about that in a squat, a wide stance is kind of like the goal, and that if you can make it in a wide stance, you can also make it in a narrow one. Why is that?
Um, well, actually, it's super simple. I I go along with Frank Sinatra, who said, "If you make it there," or actually, he sang about it. If you make it there, you'll make it anywhere, and that's exactly what it's about. If you make it in New York, you'll make it anywhere, and that's the same with the wide stance. As stupid as this sounds, it's the hardest, most challenging position for your hips for squatting, right? Another question is, yeah, but it feels better when I go narrow. It's like, yes, that's true. But life is about um, tackling the hardest challenges. It's not about watering it down so it feels better for you. This is not how this works. Technically speaking, for the squat, it's what does that mean for a squat? It's the hardest position for your hips to stay neutral. That means it's the hardest position for your knees to stay neutral. That means pointing forward and not caving in. It's the hardest position for your feet to stay neutral and not displaced, whether that's collapsing in or collapsing out or whatever it is. So a wide stance squat symbolizes the hardest stance you can um, accomplish and you can master. That's it. It doesn't mean it's your strongest position at the moment. It doesn't mean it's your best position, whatever it is, but it is by far, hands down, the hardest one to learn. And I think it's worth investing a lot of time in challenging the hardest positions um, for your hips, for your knees, and for your ankles. And that also means big muscle wise rather than starting with a narrow stance, which feels better, and then experiencing stuff that happens to your hips. Because what is the difference? Your hips, like your glutes and your hamstrings, need that challenge. Wide stance, free muscle jobs, that's what your hips need. If you never practice this, it will at some point present itself as a problem, whether that's pain, whether that's no progress. So the principle to start with is you have to master the squat in the widest stance possible with the rules, keeping the hips neutral, right? That doesn't mean it's the best position for you yet. That means for most people who train, this is not the position where you will be able to move the most weight. That is fine. That's what we're working on. And it doesn't mean you should squat every single session in the widest stance. It just means you have to master it at some point, and that's worth investing a lot of time in. So that's the principle where I'm coming from is learn how to do the hardest stuff to get better and adjust in your current training. That's the shortest answer I can deliver. um, it's worth mastering it if you're experiencing either a lack of progress or any kind of pain in hips, knees, and ankles.
Why does it feel for many people better to turn their toes slightly to the outside? Because you mentioned just to have like a parallel stance, but what if, because I myself find that oftentimes easier, or I kind of like want to have my toes to the outside. What can we take, or what can you read from that position?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first of all, the goal is the widest stance possible with your feet pointing straight, right? As the end goal. That doesn't mean you should start like this, but as the end goal. That's like the holy grail of squatting. By the way, that's how 99% of all world class powerlifters squat, right? It's not my idea, it's maybe the best position to move a lot of weight. Otherwise, trust me, pro athletes who squat the, the current world record, I don't know, a couple of 100 kilos, they wouldn't do it. If a narrow stance with weightlifting shoes would be the strongest position for them to move the most weight, trust me, they would do it. Obviously, it's not. So it's stability wise, best position for your hips, at the same time being the most challenging one. Once you turn your feet out, it gives you a little bit more wiggle room in your hips. That means if you point your toes out, that means you have a little bit more wiggle room for external rotation at the hips. It just feels better in the beginning, and that's totally fine, right? I'm just saying you have to keep in mind what your end goal is. Is it feet straight and wide stance? You can start with your feet pointed slightly out. That's totally fine, right? But remember the rules we have. You have to get there to the end goal at the end of the day, not the end of the training day, but at the end of your training journey, right? If you never do it, that means you will always go further out because it feels better, right? I think Steve Jobs said, if you want to make people feel happy, sell ice cream. Don't do hard stuff, right? So feeling better in training is not necessarily in line with um, getting better and seeing more progress. And that's what we have to work towards. It absolutely feels better to turn your toes out, but it feels absolutely shitty to have hip problems or no progress as well. So know where the end goal is and work towards it. All right, don't be fucking stupid and go for the widest stance, toes forward because Greg said so. Squat 200 kilos, although your PR is 200 kilos. Let your knee case in, and you're gonna tear your ACL. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. But if your stance is narrow like this and toes pointing out, okay, let's take it a step further. Go like 3 centimeters to the outside. And then 3 months later, you go 2 more centimeters, and then 2 more centimeters. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years later, you're there at the epiphany and the holy grail of training, which is wide stance, toes pointing forward. Just because the goal is hard to reach doesn't mean you get to adjust it to your feelings in your own training. That's the way it is.
You mentioned the external rotation here, that if I'm paraphrasing that now, you said that kind of like turning your toes to the outside helps you with external rotation. But am I mistaken that hip in that external rotation is its strongest position? Because this then kind of like contradicts what you just said, because you said that slightly turning the toes to the outside is helping you get external rotation, and I actually want to have externally rotated hips, but then you tell me that I should have them pointing forward.
That is a brilliant question because that's what I'm gonna be debating about in the next 10 years. Okay, there's two ways to get to more external rotation, and there's no debate, zero about what's the strongest position of your hips. It is in external rotation.
Yeah.
No one's questioning it. I'm not. There's just two ways to get there. I'm on the tension side. That means keeping your, as the angle, keeping your toes pointing straight forward and using tension to get to external rotation. That means we've talked about this before, but let's recap it. If you stand straight and squeeze your glutes, toes pointing straight forward, that's the most external rotation you'll ever need. As soon as you squeeze your glutes, your big thigh bone are going to rotate to the outside. That's my road. That's using tension to get to rotation. Turning your feet out is more external rotation without tension,
Mhm.
right? And that's why it feels better in the beginning, but you see more bones displacing in the process because you're not focusing on tension, but you're focusing on position only. So that's a brilliant question. And that's exactly why I think it makes sense to work slowly towards that angle of wide stance and toes pointing forward to learn how to create tension to get to external rotation. Just because we agree on the same goal doesn't mean we have the same path to get there. I agree with external rotation at the hips. I disagree with not using tension to get there, right? And that is the hard part. And that takes a long time because it's not an easy fix. If I see someone, if I coach someone, and I want to make myself and that person really happy in that moment, short term, and make the hips feel better, I immediately tell them, point your toes out because that will give them more external rotation. Makes me look really good because it feels better for them, and it works for like 6 months or a year
Mm.
until it doesn't, because the person has not learned how to create tension to get to external rotation, right? My way, is harder, takes longer, but it's going to solve actual problems, whether that's more progress or pain in your hips, knees, and ankles.
And you also, in the book, you touch on the, let's put it kind of like quote unquote, dangers of always squatting with a narrow stance. What are you thinking of? What is there to kind of like be mindful of?
Um, so there's two layers to this. The first one is, naturally, if you have a narrow stance, you're going to use more quads, right? That's just the way it is. Because you can literally drop down straight, and if you wear weightlifting shoes and all that kind of stuff, you're just more prone to using your quads, especially on the way down, rather than using your hamstrings. So that's the first one. And the second one is, you're limiting, um, the danger, the possibility of your knees caving in. All right, and that sounds like a good plan, because the more narrow your stance, the less space your knees have to actually move in, right? And that works for a certain extent, but you're missing the tension road. You're missing that there's, in my world, there's position with tension. That means you have to learn how to get your hips from a standing position to the whatever you want to call it, bottom of the squat position, using your hamstrings to put the brakes on. And that's what you're missing. And that's literally really hard to practice with a narrow stance, right? That doesn't mean it's automatically happening just because you're going in a wide stance. It's not. You're right. But long term, it's the harder path, but it's a safer path. So narrow stance, way more quads possible. About hamstrings, wider stance, you're way more forced to use your hamstrings. Again, not automatically. It's not going to automatically happen. You still have to practice using it. But there's no way you can use your quads in a wide stance as much as with a narrow stance. So that's the main argument on my side for not squatting narrow all the time.
What would you recommend for someone who is like a complete newbie to squatting? Where to begin?
Super simple. Grab something that you can hold in between your hands and you can squeeze, right? So as much weight as you can handle, picking up off the floor and squeezing it, and be actually able to hold it, um, and do like 20 reps and see. Let's make a practical example. If you grab, like, whether that's a kettlebell or a sandbag, you will squat way wider because that stuff has to fit in between
Mhm.
your knees somehow, right? Um, and that is automatically going to set up your stance. For me, the stance follows the object and not the other way around. So
Mhm.
I'm not overthinking what my stance should look like. I'm doing it the other way around. I grab stuff that I should naturally grab, that I've been grabbing for the last, not me particular, but humans over the last tens of thousands of years. Stuff in between your hands, and your stance is going to adjust to it, right?
Mm.
That's the first one. Don't start squatting with a barbell, because that's unnatural. The weight is outside of your center of mass. So then there's weird stuff happening. You're adjusting your
Mm.
stance to something that feels better for you because the weight is on the outside. Weight on the outside of your body is the most unnatural thing ever. So if you want to start off, grab something in between your hands that you can squeeze, do 20 reps, take a video and see how what rep one looks and rep 20. And I guarantee rep 20 will look better than rep one.
And what do you mean with better? What should the person kind of like look at? What are we looking for when we compare number 1 to number 20?
Um, Super simple. If you're new to training, do it more in the box squat style. That means grab a thingy, shoot your hips back as far as you can, and keep your knees over your ankles and do 20 reps, right? You will see that you'll either drop to the bench at first on the first rep, and probably your knees are going to come in slightly if you go for a wide stand. That's fine. And then watch rep two. Are you going to still drop at the same pace? And are your knees coming in more or less? And then go for rep three, four, five, six. And at 17, 18, 19, 20, are your knees coming in less? Yes, perfect. Then you're on the right track. Are you slowing your pace towards that bench? Yes, okay, you're on the right track. That's how we start defining how much weight you should use. All right, let's say you have chosen, you're a man and you're super ambitious and you have a big ego, and you're using too much weight on the sandbag first. Well, guess what will happen? You're either going to drop faster on rep 17 than on rep one, or you're either going to come in more on rep 17 than on rep one. So that's your measurement tool of how much weight you should use. This is not an Excel thing. This is not a mathematical solution. This is we call the last rep rule. This is, okay, visually, how's your squat improving? If it's getting worse, chances are you either don't know what you're doing or you're using too much weight. And this is how you can win the game of training. It's not about percentages. It's not about set weights or set exercises. It's about knowing the principles and then applying it to training and having measurements in place to see if I'm actually winning or if I'm just ticking off boxes in whether that's Excel sheets, to-do lists, or wherever you have your programming on.
And what if I run into the problem that, for instance, at rep 10, I can get down with, let's say, the sandbag and a front rack carry, and I sit down, but then I feel like I can't kind of like mobilize the right muscles to stand myself back up again without pushing my knees forward or starting to kind of like use momentum or anything. What does that then tell me? Is it like, okay, I need to use less weight, or should I start playing more with the height of where I'm sitting down, or how would you play these variables?
Okay, this is super important because the short answer is you're either deconditioned, which is mostly the case, or you just don't know what you're doing, which is
What
fine.
do you mean when
But
you say deconditioned?
deconditioned means if you're you're not as strong as you should be, or you're
Okay.
not as fit and conditioned in
Okay.
terms of cardio as you should be, and that's totally fine, right? That just means you're exhausted at rep 10.
Mhm.
That's it. That's it. This is not rocket science, and you don't have to adjust anything. You don't have to play around with 27 variables. That just means, okay, right now, I'm here. I can maintain the rules of the game of training, which means, okay, neutral hip and keep the knees over the ankles with 20 kilos for 10 reps.
Mhm.
That's all it is. So my goal for the next session is to stick to the rules, use 20 kilos, and try to go for 11 reps,
Mhm.
right? 10 or 11 are random numbers. Could be 3, 5, 25, or 20, 27, 5. It doesn't matter. Um, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to get to a powerlifting competition, well, then we don't have to do like more than 5, 6, 7, or 8 reps. If you're training like a normal person, okay, I go 20 reps with 20 kilos and then 25 reps with 20 kilos. There's no point in doing 100 squats with
Mhm.
50 kilos, right? Don't overthink it. You have to adjust the weight or the height or anything else. It's just, okay, set one height, stick to the rules, and make it work. If you make it work, that let's say the goal is 10 reps, right? We set the goal of 10 reps with 50 kilos. You've reached that goal. All right. Now we can start working on, okay, maybe now we can go lower. For the next 6 weeks, we're going to squat to the same height, a little bit lower, again with maybe 40 kilos, and then up the weight until we have the same measurements again. Don't immediately act on stuff just because you think you have to change something.
Mhm.
Maybe you don't have to. Just stick with it, stick with the rules, stick with the weight, and just go for one more rep on the next set. That's it.
Okay. I
That
don't
is
have
it for
any
today.
more. Yeah, I don't have any more questions.
Sweet. All right, guys. Good questions. Bring them on. We're gonna talk about next week about your questions. If you send them in, post them here. Send me whatever videos, questions. Greg at gregsgym.com or Instagram at Greg or Gregs. And looking forward. Talk to you next week.